Welcome here this morning. Great to see the huge crowds out. Last time under level 2, nothing ahead but freedom. We have glorious changes in here. Do you see that beauty behind me? This is where you have to use your imagination. This is steps toward beauty as it unfolds. So Tom and many other hard workers. Who else was here? Kara and Janelle, you were both here. Jess, you were here. Ian. Yeah, because apparently back when they built this place, they built things solid. And so that stage was a pretty solid thing to take apart. But anyway, no more exalting people high above you. Now we're all on an even plane. I just wanted to make it symbolic. That work? Okay. But also, very exciting, part of that freedom is that next week, apparently, if we want to, we can sing behind our masks. How about that? I know. It's very exciting. I confessed upstairs in the early service that there have been occasions when a song was sung here, and it was just that type of song that I sang quietly behind my mask. I know.
This one is being recorded.
Confession's good for the soul. Pardon? It is being recorded. Oh, that's true.
So.
Let him come after me. Obviously, I learned. No, I won't even go there. Okay, no. Don't do it. Don't do it. We're going to, as you can see, I am not the band. I am not going to sing with or without a mask this morning. So we are going to have some recorded songs again. So we're going to start off with Audrey Assad, who sings much nicer than I do. And then after the one song, we're going to do the prayers this morning in a 2-part way. And the second part of those will be another song. But I want to do something else in between. So just enjoy this first song by Audrey Assad.
Is
Thanks. And I want you to appreciate with the new layout of the sound and the computer being done from the back, it really takes eagle eye on the computer to do this task. Do you know how small that cursor looks when you're sitting in the back of the room trying to control it up there? Good job, John. So what I want to do as the first part of the prayer time this morning is a type of intercession exercise, and the shape of it is kind of borrowed from loving kindness meditation. So loving kindness meditation is a Buddhist practice that has been studied by lots of social scientists because it's something that's really, really easy to teach. And so it's easy to train people to do it quickly. It's it's got its roots in Buddhism, but in a way it doesn't require any religious connection to do it. It's just a way to try to be intentional for about 15 minutes of your day to orient yourself toward blessing everything, to blessing yourself, to blessing the people you love, to blessing the people you don't find so easy to love, to blessing the whole world. And what they've found is there have been countless studies now have shown all kinds of positive effects, positive psychological effects, positive effects in your body, positive effects relationally, and all this kind of stuff when you do it. And it really is a mirror of Christian intercession too, which is pretty much about something quite similar. So what I want to do is just take some of the structure of that and to think of it in terms of our bringing things to God this morning. And so what I want you to do first is to get an image of your mind of how you can picture bringing someone into God's blessing. Just try to think of how you can picture that. So some type of image or some type, it doesn't have to be visual, it could be any way of giving attention to something where you're drawing it into the blessing of God. So I'll just give you about 30 seconds to think of how you want to picture that so you can do it intentionally. And by the blessing of God, I mean to draw something into God's favor, to have God smile upon someone, to have someone being brought forward into well-being, to being safe, cared for, aware of being cared for. Okay, so hopefully you have an image in mind, some way of picturing that. And so the first thing I would like you to do is spend, and we'll probably just do about half a minute each on each of these. Spend about a half minute thinking of someone who's very, very easy for you to love. So it just comes very naturally to want to picture them receiving God's blessing in that way. So spend a minute thinking of someone or even a couple people that are very, very easy to love and bless. Picture drawing them into God's blessing. Now imagine how that same person would probably really, really love to return the favor and have you blessed in that same way. So think of the other person inviting you to join them in that space of God's blessing. Now think of one or two people that you know are really particularly in need of care, particularly in need of some kind of blessing. And spend a minute drawing them into that place of blessing too. Okay, now the harder one. Now think of someone that's hard for you to bless. Someone who's annoying, challenging in your life. Think of the Facebook friend that you're tempted to unfriend. And think of drawing that person into that place of blessing as well. And now finally, wrap it up by thinking about that sense of blessing, just extending outward toward everyone and everything, every living thing, every non-living thing, just encompassing all that is, all being caught up in God's blessing. Just to make one last comment on how I said there's been a lot of social science research around it. One of the fascinating things, which trust me is not true about most social science research, they did follow-up research on people who learned that practice as being like a lab rat, so to speak, and they did follow-up 6 months and a couple years later, and found incredibly high percentage of people chose to still do it after doing it for those first months because they found it such a helpful practice. So if you find that a helpful way to spend just a couple minutes in prayer, I invite you to do that. But I also want to get the help of Mary Gauthier this morning, so this next song is a favorite of mine. I'm sure a lot of you have seen me share it here before, or maybe upstairs, but the song is called Mercy Now. Steve Bell also does it too with a version. And this is a song where she goes through some of the people that she loves and cares for in her life, who really need that sense of mercy. And so possibly someone that you thought of in the first part of our prayer, possibly someone that you just know is really in need of care and mercy this morning. Peter mentioned Donna. We know that Donna's been struggling for a long time, so it'd be great to be thinking about Donna this morning. Anyone else? Anyone wants to name? We can all have it on our minds as we are listening to the song this morning. Yeah, Peter?
My grandson on cannabis oral exam. He's going to have another oral exam done tomorrow.
Okay, the one who was injured in the eye before, he's still struggling with something in his eye?
Yeah, we're going to see how it turns out tomorrow.
Okay, so Peter's grandson.
Yeah, Tristan, yeah.
Tristan.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm sure we each have people that we know that we're thinking about often in our own life. So keep those people in mind, and this song is really great at helping you connect, I think, in a feeling way with people and even with systems and structures around us that need care and that need attention. So, mercy now.
My father sure could use a little mercy now. The fruits of his labor falling right slowly on the ground. His work is almost over. It won't be long, he won't be around. I love my father. He could use some mercy now.
Sometimes I think I should watch that every day. Just the violin alone, man. Gorgeous. Okay, this is kind of a part 2. About a month ago, I did a talk when we were all shut down, so it's just a recording. And I talked about the kind of responding to the question, what's the point of a church community? Why do this thing that we do? And some of the ideas that I talked about in that talk were the importance of having a place where there was kind of an open door to having meaningful conversations, where we built each other up and built the community up. And so this is a part 2 to that. Oh, did you see that? Is that not amazing? I don't know. I don't know if there's a way of doing that. Oh, here, let's see if I do. Oh. Yeah, there it is. Beautiful. Okay, so community structure and spirit. That's what I want to talk about today, how those two things need to be, it's still going, need to be knit together, just like those hands. So here's the story. Carol and I got married in a different era of time, long time ago, getting on 40 years. And first year of marriage, we were living in a tiny little upstairs apartment in a house in St. Boniface, Winnipeg. 2 idealistic Christian young people, and I actually, so we had this conversation. I asked Carol just last night whether she remembered this conversation, and found out she didn't particularly remember it. But it's always stuck with me for 40 years. And I can't remember the context of it, but I think the context of it is that we were deciding some of the ways that we wanted to live, and we were making a commitment that we were always going to be debt-free, that we weren't going to do debt, period. So we were just kind of committing ourselves together. Okay, we're not going to do that. That just causes problems. We're avoiding that trap. So other than mortgage, we're not going to do debt. And we stuck to it, by the way. With some very rare occasions, we said we would do a credit card, but if we ever didn't pay off the balance, snip, snip, snip. So there was one time, this was probably about 15 years into marriage, where we didn't pay it. Carol got out the scissors and went, "No, just wait. If we pay this off next month, then we get a second chance." She said, "All right." That was it. Never done it since. Anyway, I think that was the context in which we're having this conversation. But we were, the main thing that I remember that came out of this conversation is we concluded together, let's keep on expecting a lot from each other. Let's do life that way, where we expect a lot from each other. But in order to make it work, we have to really, really focus at grace and forgiveness with each other in order to make that work. So let's do both. Let's not back off on trying to aim high, but let's make it so full of grace and forgiveness with each other that we can do that. And I think it was a great move for us. I think it really helped us to sort of establish that way of being together early on. And I think there are lots of ways in which we've borne fruit. Because what we didn't want was to have high ideals that we held ourselves to with, a sense of feeling like we had to measure up and the other person was checking over our shoulders all the time or anything like that. So, and I think we've managed to avoid that trap. But we also wanted to say that, we expect that we're going to do things, well. And so let's expect that of each other. I think that's one of the roles of church, is that same balance of things. To say that, you know what, let's do life reaching for what it could be. We have this amazing vision that Jesus came into the world and started describing and helping us to see in a brand new way, helping a culture that was mired in stuff to be able to see there's a different way. We can imagine something much different, much better. And the church can say, we really want to aim for reflecting that. But if we're going to do that, we better be so full of grace and forgiveness, or this is going to get ugly, right? So I think that's what needs to happen is holding those two things together. But the way I want to talk about them particularly in regard to this conversation is how structure and spirit come together. How structure, intentionality, teaching gives the content, but then spirit is what's needed to make it come to life and be a life-giving thing rather than something that's dead or lifeless. So now here's the thing. The new, Microsoft PowerPoint in recent years does fun tricks like those hands. But here's one thing, what it does is, right here, I'm not sure. Oh. You see those lovely boxes that it creates for you? That's really nice. But what I do is, when I do a PowerPoint, I print out the outline and then use that outline to talk. But when you do something like that, my PowerPoint thinks that those don't belong in my outline because they're in cute little pictures, so they don't include those things, and I have to look over my shoulder to see what I have. So forgive me. I blame Microsoft, but we forgive them because they gave us the lovely hands, making the heart the thing. So, the teaching of Jesus. I'm not going to give you all the teaching of Jesus this morning. I figured that would be a tall order. But when we think of the teaching of Jesus, we think of things maybe particularly like the Sermon on the Mount, which is that place in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that in various ways give us some of the heart of that, especially Matthew and Luke, and summarize a lot of the general teaching of Jesus. And when we think of the Sermon on the Mount, we might particularly think of, I always love the phrase, the Upside Down Kingdom, which was this favorite book I read when I was a young man, and the sense that he turns things on their head. And particularly you see this in the Beatitudes, which actually is one of the lectionary readings for this morning. Like, blessed are the poor in spirit. And what Jesus means when he says blessed are the poor in spirit, he doesn't mean let's hope nice things for them. He's saying, they are the blessed ones. That's what he's saying. It's an upside down view, that they're positioned for receiving. They're positioned to be open to what's possible in ways that other people are not. So a key part of the teaching of Jesus is turning things on their heads so that we can see from a new point of view, exalting the poor, exalting the marginalized, exalting the people who are captive, who recognize their blindness in lots of different ways. So that's one key part, Sermon on the Mount. Another key part is the inner and outer alignment, this sense that it's not just your outer actions that matter, it's the way your inner world reflects that. And so there's a sense that they both matter. If we want to learn how to live well in the world, we have to pay attention to our outer selves and our inner selves and how they align. Radical trust, right? Some of the things we're invited to do in the Sermon on the Mount, elsewhere in the Gospels, like hard stuff, like give away everything, for example, right? Like pretty tough, pretty tall order, and of course, hard to understand exactly what that means. Not all want to be itinerant people who live on other people's goodwill at all times. So what does it mean for us to give everything away? To prioritize other things over our security, and so on. And then love of enemies, this real mark of Jesus' teaching, the sense that loving our neighbor means literally everyone, including the people that are very, very hardest to love, the people who have set themselves up against us. So these are some of the things that we think of when we think of the Sermon on the Mount and that characterize the teaching of Jesus. But we also think specifically of how he tried to train this band of people, men and women, who gathered around him and became kind of his entourage, traveling around, and he's teaching as he goes. And of course, some of the teaching went for everyone, and a lot of it was just for his disciples to learn. How do they become the people who carry forward Jesus' teaching into the world. And so that way they become like the beginning of the church. And so he sends them out with this. If you want to characterize the way in which he's training them, it's like it's all about service, serving others. It's about healing, bringing healing to the world, and it's about doing it with love. They'll know you are Christians by your love. That sense of it, the mark of doing this in the right way is that you do it with love. So that's the instruction that he gives. Again, with radical trust is there again. Like, do it with a sense of risk. It's not going to be easy to do this task that I'm calling you. Take up your cross, he says. In other words, risk giving up your ego, risk giving up your life. Those who lose their life will find it. These kinds of ideas, they're just threaded all through Jesus' teaching all the time. And then it's important to understand, I think, that in all the idealistic teachings about Jesus and the mentions about love, it doesn't mean that Jesus' teaching is soft on consequences. So Jesus was quite willing to tell people, like, put that sword away. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. If you give yourself over to violence, you're probably going to be the victim of violence yourself. You're going to get caught up in a system that will kill you. And a similar thing to people in general, a lot of the hell passages make the most sense when you see them as being literal references to the fact that if you give yourself over to this way of resisting Rome violently, you're all going to die. And a lot of them did when Jerusalem was destroyed one generation later than Jesus. So it's important to remember that Jesus wasn't soft on the fact that there are real, like, it's not like everything is rosy and everything's going to turn out great. Like, if you give yourself over to a lousy way of living, there's probably going to be some negative consequences in your life as a result of that. So those are just some ways to really, really quickly sum up the teaching of Jesus. One of the things that teaching does is it orients the structure and intention of a group of people. So teaching gives us clear direction and focus. That focus, again, is in the direction of love, service, justice, peace, those kind of things. But the direction isn't about perfectionism or rigidity. It's about those ideals held flexibly, held with spirit, held with love. And even when you think of the Sermon on the Mount, like a lot of people have said, the Sermon on the Mount is too high of a bar. It's there to make us feel bad about how we need God, right? Like, I remember, you probably heard, some of those have been around for a while, have heard me say the story before, when I went to a Bible school when I was 20, and I was talking to one of the speakers afterwards, and he had given some spiritualized interpretation of something in the Sermon on the Mount. I said, well, like, it sure sounds like Jesus is saying we should really do this. And he goes, oh, you were saying before you're a Mennonite, right? And I went, yeah. I said, oh, you're the guys who take the Sermon on the Mount seriously. And he was like, I'm sorry, is that not a Christian thing? Like, what are you talking about? And no, because in his mind, and he was totally open about this, is that the point of the Sermon on the Mount is so that we knew that we had all failed and were worms and therefore needed the grace of God. That's kind of its only purpose. It wasn't there to teach us how to live. It was just there to show us how we all fall flat. It's like, wow, I guess I didn't even know how to think that way at the time. And I think the way I've made sense of the Sermon on the Mount for the last 20 years of my life is that, because it is really hard to live up to, right? Like, it's hard not to read it and find all kinds of ways in which we fall short of it. That part's true. But I think the point of it is, this is what a community is meant to hold up as the direction in which to live. It's a community ethic. It's not an individual ethic that we're meant to live up to and measure ourselves against at all times. It's the sense, a community can hold up these values. A great example of this, when I was in the board of MCC, we did a trip to Akron, Pennsylvania. And on one of these trips, we visited an Amish home. And this had been, maybe 3 years after the school shooting. Some of you will remember there was a shooting in a little Amish schoolhouse. and can't remember how many girls were killed in this. And this family that we went to, it was really, really good friends of theirs had lost one of their daughters in that school shooting. So we were talking about this with the family, and they had said it was so confusing to them because reporters started coming around because the word had gotten out that the community publicly forgave the shooter and reached out to the shooter in a relationship. And they were just so puzzled that reporters would come to ask them about this. And it's like, well, of course we're going to forgive him. That's what we do. Like, it was just not even a question for them that's what the community response would be oriented towards. Because the community ethic had given themselves to this as the way to live. And so that made it so much more possible than it would be for others to make that kind of a choice. And it was real. Like, it wasn't like they felt like they had to forgive or someone was going to look over their shoulder and tell them they weren't doing it right. It was just that all of their culture was oriented toward that's what we do. And they recognized like we do terrible things, like we get angry at our spouse and we get forgiven. We know that forgiveness is what we need to live. So I think that's the whole point of the community, of the Sermon on the Mount, is the reason it's such a high bar is because it's what a community is getting called to. It's like saying, this is what our community is about, and this is what our shared character will be like. This is what we want to reflect in the way we are together. So teaching clarifies commitments for us in our communities, and then we do practices and rituals that enact those commitments, that build them into our life, that habituate us to practice these things. So that's why, like in the Celtic service, probably more regularly than down here, of course, but in the Celtic service where we have a simple liturgy, we have a weekly confession, and it habituates us into this rhythm of recognizing and knowing there's lots of ways in which we don't live up to the goals that we want to have, but we still want to have those as our goals, and we still know that we're welcomed and accepted in spite of the ways that we fall short. And so the rhythm of that builds that into our life. It soaks it into our being. There's all kind of things that we do together that are meant to build some of those commitments into the fabric of our life. Okay, so that's the teaching, the structure of community. Then the Spirit of Jesus. These are just some ways. When you think of the Spirit of Jesus, what are some of the things you think that become possible because of the Spirit? I know you can look at these things on the screen. I probably should have backed it up here. What are some things you think of when you think of the Spirit of Jesus? What the Spirit of Jesus, what the Spirit inside of us enables? What's possible because of the Spirit?
We give grace.
Pardon? To give grace? Yeah.
We can have hope despite the way things look.
Hope in spite of the way things look. Yeah. To see the impossible and hope for it so much that you can actually do it and take steps out in that direction. Okay, let's look through this list. There's one place where Jesus says, we tend to be amazed when we think of the stories of some of the things Jesus did. And Jesus says, you guys are going to do way more than this. Because the Spirit that is in me is in you, and you're going to keep on doing stuff, and it's going to be amazing what you do. The ability to actually do the love, to follow through on it, to have it come to life and be real and be authentic. The sense of an inner teacher, there's so much emphasis on the Spirit is actually in you, and so you will know what's true. You will be able to discern. You will be able to see what's possible. You'll find inner peace, freedom from fear. There'll be this alignment, and this alignment, I hope, alignment with each other, alignment with God, alignment with the teachings. There's something about the Spirit. Alignment might not sound like it might sound like too abstract or intellectual of a word to pair with Spirit. But for me, there's the alignment that the Spirit brings is what makes it. It's like, I should have prepared a picture of this in advance. If you can think of something like, maybe like a combination lock. You know, you're doing these different things and then all the pieces fall in place and then all of a sudden you can do what you couldn't do before. That's what I mean by alignment. Like there's an energy, there's an enthusiasm, a potency that all comes from alignment. When our inner and outer selves are the same, when we're aligned with the people around us, when we're aligned with the community, that's that power of the Spirit that gets enabled by that kind of alignment is huge. And so when I think of the power of the Spirit, I think alignment is a key part of that. The way the Spirit works to bring those things into alignment. And another sign of the Spirit is when pain gets turned into joy. Doesn't mean that it's still not pain, but the pain gets infused with joy, gets encompassed with joy. I wanted to read just a little bit of John. John 14, 15, 16 are great places to read to get a sense of the Spirit of God and what Jesus was assuring the disciples that they would know once he wasn't there anymore. So I'm going to just read some excerpts from John 14 to 16. And as you hear these words, I want you to think about those things that the Spirit enables, those traits of the Spirit, the alignment that happens, but also the interweaving between the things of the Spirit and the words of Jesus and the teaching of Jesus, and how they're in evidence here too. If you love me, you will follow my teachings, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate, a helper, the Spirit, to be with you forever. This is the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive because it neither sees him nor knows him. You know the Spirit because the Spirit is with you and will be in you. I will not leave you orphaned. I am coming to you. In a little while the world will no longer see me, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. On that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. They who have my commandments and keep them are those who love me, and those who love me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them and reveal myself to them. Judas said, Lord, how is it that you will reveal yourself to us and not to the world? Jesus answered him, those who love me will keep my word, and my Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them. Whoever does not love me does not keep my words. And the word that you hear isn't mine, but it's from the Father who sent me. I have said these things to you while I am still with you, but the Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all that I have said to you. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid. If you abide in me, if you stay with me, and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. This is my teaching, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. For you are my friends if you do what I am teaching. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant doesn't know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you to go and bear fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. I am giving you these instructions so that you may love one another. When the Advocate comes, whom I will send to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth who comes from the Father, he will testify on my behalf. You also are to testify, because you have been with me from the beginning. Do you hear the way all those things keep weaving together? The love, the Spirit, the teachings, the staying with it. All those things just keep weaving together. So we saw some of the things that this structure does. What kind of things does the Spirit do in a day-to-day human sense? It helps overcome our laziness and resistance. And laziness isn't like a critique of how bad it is to be human. What laziness is often about is fear. It's amazing how much laziness is invoked by the fears that we have in life. Courage in the face of fear comes from the Spirit. Align in individual and communal discernment. The possibility of radical trust and hope in action when the impossible becomes possible. The idea of mercy, the ability truly for mercy to triumph over judgment. So this doesn't become a new form of a purity culture or a holiness culture, where it's all about whether we live up to something or get excluded or cast out. So those are some of the things that the Spirit does within a community. So when we think of the task of the church community, I think the church community is where teaching, the structure, and the Spirit, those two things align and integrate. And it's so important that the two are held hand in hand and that the two integrate. Teaching and structure without Spirit is lifeless and overwhelming. It either feels too hard, we get burned out because you're trying, but it's the energy isn't coming from the inside. Or else, even worse, there's this sense of splitting where you maintain this fake purity, this fake thing on the outside, but on the inside, that's just not very true for you anymore, which is basically hypocrisy, right? The pretense like you're going for something when you really have given up in your own behavior and your own life. These are the fruits of not having the Spirit to line up with the teaching. And loving and just values and ideals require, this is just like the story I began with Carolyn and me in our relationship early on. If you want to aim for loving and just values, it requires authentic grace and loving forgiveness in order to stay soft and human. Just can't keep shooting for loving and just values without having that grace and loving forgiveness to energize it from within and keep it soft and warm. Okay, got ahead of myself. So the church community is where teaching, again, where teaching and structure and the Spirit align. From the other point of view as well, teaching and structure provide the consistency through the ebbs and flows of Spirit. You can focus on the teaching and the commitments and the structure. That's something you can always do. You can always keep those in place. But the Spirit is going to ebb and flow. That's just the nature of the Spirit, like the stuff from Nicodemus' conversation, you don't know where the wind blows, that the Spirit is not so predictable as the teachings and commitments and the structure of a group. So we need the consistency, we need the structure, the container of the teachings in order to provide a sense of consistency as the Spirit will ebb and flow in our life together. But at the same time, Spirit without teaching and structure can also go off the rails. That when it becomes all about the freedom and all about the enthusiasm and all about the emotion, then things happen in communities where people hurt each other, where the community loses focus, where desires, lusts, and greed get justified in community. So I think, to be honest, I think this is part of what we see in our world sometimes lately, where we see communities that have all kinds of passion, right? Like passion that even brings people together and unifies them on a purpose. And it doesn't look like the teaching of Jesus, right? So they have something spiritual going. Doesn't look like the Spirit of Jesus, though, right? But it's the same sense of passion and enthusiasm and doing stuff. It's just not aligned anymore with the teaching, the commitments, the direction that Jesus helped us to follow. So if you look at this chart, I think what healthy communities do, this is just sort of a summing up kind of picture. I think what healthy communities do is they help us live in those center two blocks held together. They help us hold those two things together and draw us away from the things on either side. So they give us a living structure where we have direction and focus, where we have a meaningful identity, that anchored with wings that Pete just talked about recently, that flexible sense of stability. That's what the living structure of a church community does. And then it provides this space to be filled with this aligned spirit, a sense of radical trust, a hopeful energy, a love in action, and a sense of joy. And those two things together can integrate and keep us in that middle space and keep us from going off on either side here. So if you go off on the, away from spirit, then you get this lifeless structure, which is rigid beliefs that don't change to fit the context. You get this sense of perfectionism and burnout, purity, judgment, exclusion, hypocrisy. Or on the right, you have the energy that goes off the rails, that's unfocused, that's unchanneled toward community values. And so the ego energy that gets caught up with fear, with laziness and pride, greed and envy, and addictive desires. These are all real and all human and all are just waiting inside of us all the time if we don't have a church community to help draw those things toward the center. So, invitation for us. I'm sure I have those written here. Oh no, PowerPoint did it to me again. Okay, so they have twofold invitation to stay focused on the teaching and example of Jesus and all that resonates and integrates with it, regardless of what doctrines you believe. Like so many people are struggling because the way they were taught doctrine when they were younger, they just can't do it that way anymore. It doesn't work out. But very, very few people feel like they don't see the value in Jesus' teachings in life anymore. Like there's just a natural sense of authenticity and truth that rings through those, so that almost everyone can continue to see that giving heart and direction for community. So one of the things, we keep putting those things before us. We keep orienting ourselves in that direction. And that helps us to stay together with incredible diversity. Like if you ask people their specific beliefs, they might be all over the map. But there's a sense of coming together in these key ways that Jesus is drawing our attention and pointing us toward, that can give us a unity through the midst of all of that. And then one of the ways to keep that alive is to think, like, what does that teaching, what does that direction resonate with as we keep looking outward and as we keep staying engaged in our worlds? So for me, one of those things was that exercise that we did earlier on today when I read about loving kindness meditation. I went, oh my goodness, that was this Keith Turner's phrase? That smells like Jesus. I think it was Keith Turner who used to use that phrase. It really resonates with the teaching of Jesus to do a practice like that. So my first question for you today is, what are some new things that you're encountering that resonate with the teaching of Jesus? What are some things in your life that are ways in which it's like, oh, this is a new thing I'm reading, this is a new thing I'm getting involved in. It resonates for me with the teachings of Jesus. Yeah, Peter?
I think of 2 or 3 different things.
Yeah, wow.
I try to look for the church praise for certain people.
To pray, when you pray for certain people?
Yeah, I do that.
Yeah.
They're always on my mind.
Yeah.
Pray for them.
Yeah, and I know you're always quick to bring someone to mind when we're praying here together.
Yes, I do that.
Yeah. So that's one thing that resonates with Jesus, that it's a way to care for people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anything else that people think of?
My current work has opened the whole arena of incarcerated persons. What does it mean to try to reintegrate into community when you have a history of offense?
Yeah.
And, I've seen that in Jesus' teaching my whole life, but it's different when you're building relationships and on the ground with people for whom these are very real, tangible challenges to move forward and flourish and thrive.
Yeah, so seeing what the teaching of Jesus can look like in that setting, that's a whole new thing. And also should be the focus for us to be praying too, right? Because I gather there's some funding issues coming with the federal government getting too distracted to write a check.
Yes.
Yeah. Anything else that comes to mind?
I'm trying to learn more about meditation and what that might do for you or mean to you.
Yeah.
And it's surprising. You referenced it in the beginning. The similarities and maybe some alignment between Buddhist teaching and Christian teaching around that. This, of course, today the whole mindfulness kind of approach comes out of really Buddhist meditation teaching. But actually, Christian meditation, when you really look at it, isn't really much different. We just don't do it. Yeah, and I'm thinking, how have we missed this so long?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah. So paying attention to something like mindfulness and meditation from another tradition reminds us, oh my goodness, some of that's been in our tradition too, and we haven't even been looking.
Towards, Christian meditation.
Yeah, beautiful. So I think this is one of the ways in which, again, to go back to the last talk, the meaningful conversations we have is how do we keep this fresh so that we think the direction that Jesus sent us off in isn't something old and out of date. It's something that stays alive and fresh if we keep interpreting it in the light of our context, in the light of the new things that we're encountering. These are conversations that we always need to unpack and do together. I want to move on because it's getting a bit long now. What are some of the diverse ways that we can invite the Spirit into our community? What are some ways that we make sure that we're opening the door, opening the windows to that Spirit life blowing in the midst of our community? What are some of the ways in which we do that tangibly?
I think inviting people from the community who live a different experience to tell their story.
Okay. Hearing diverse stories. Yeah. From in and outside of the community.
Well, if you think of one, two, we are interconnected, and for those of us who are seeking to align or resonate with the Spirit, having the opportunity to be attentive and listen from a very different story and a very different experience of life, but in our own context, I think challenges those muscles to be aware of what the Spirit's up to.
Okay, beautiful.
I think to maintain an openness, for people to be able to come and be healed and be restored. I've always thought that's part of the ethos of this church, is to be a healing place, to be a hospital, somewhat, spiritually.
So to keep believing that all kinds of healing is possible.
And
Keep focusing on it.
The number of people who have come, who have been hurt and injured in the church and whatever, have been restored.
Because to keep talking about these things and people aren't experiencing healing in some way.
And in that too, to hold people with an open hand, like maybe they're not going to stay, maybe they're not going to be here forever, maybe they're just here for a time.
Right.
And then they're moving on. That's okay.
So even to be a healing community that people flow through, they might come, they might get a taste of something, and then they move on.
Not be possessive.
Right, not be possessive, trying to cling to people.
You just said again, you said numerous different community, right? So often, I know in my upbringing, people talk about the spirit as if it was an individual, right? So to some of the most precious times of a sense of moving with the spirit have been in or come out of communal times. So providing time to be together, to actually pray together, to worship together, to meditate together. Yeah.
And I'm gonna use the worship together as a segue, because when we think of worship together, we usually think of also ways in which we integrate the arts, right, into our experience. So, like doing it through music, like the way that violin hit me at the beginning of the service today. Music touches us. It reaches places that other things don't. Visual art can do that. Dramatic arts can do that. They can all be forms of worship. Oh, dance, I should say, Donna, for you. These are all ways in which something that can otherwise get squished into a small place inside of us can get opened up.
And there's full, I guess to add on to what I was saying, there's full, for me, levels of that. I can do those things alone.
Right.
The things you said in the arts even.
Yeah.
Or play that same piece of music alone and play it in the midst.
Right.
There's a whole other.
Something new opens up when we do it together. Yeah.
The welcoming of coffee.
Sorry, the welcoming of
coffee.
the welcoming of coffee. Is caffeine a spiritual reality?
No, it's just welcoming.
It's just the welcoming of it, yeah.
When I went to church when I was a kid, you had to be dressed up and bow down and, and be reverent and all this stuff, and you come in and have a cup of coffee.
Right.
You know it's human, right?
Becomes a symbol of something more than what it is, right? It's a symbol that we are trying to welcome each other and connect where we are. Yeah. Nice. Okay, Alex, then Laura.
Yeah, I think similar to the point you made about the doctrinal divides people have, but the kind of joining together and the following Jesus' teachings. I think one of the things we can do, which is really important nowadays, is to look past people's political differences. It's become increasingly harder with some controversial
Yep,
stuff.
that's probably true.
Because it doesn't matter. It does matter on one level, but there's like a greater truth that loving our neighbor is a prime directive. Use a Star Trek phrase. But it is. And it's more important than the divisions we have on the factional stuff.
So being able to see past divisions like political divisions is an important thing. Lauren?
I've been thinking about your description of trying to get us to get a sense of what alignment is. And the word that came to me, and you've also used that one this morning, is resonance. And I was thinking about that when Donna talked about the music, your violin.
Right.
And how there is something that happens when there's something real that brings that kind of alignment or resonance. That, at least for me, but I think for all of us, helps to us to move with the Spirit again, but still in the context of our Jesus' teaching and what we believe to be true. So I guess I've just been thinking about resonance and what it means and its place and tying it all together.
Thank you. Yeah, I love what you're saying about resonance and alignment and too. Yeah, Jess?
I'm just thinking, kind of similar to what Alex was saying, that having the humility, I guess, as a community to really listen and be willing to change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to hear other perspectives, and to be able to be open enough to let those perspectives really influence.
To listen so openly that you can actually be affected by it and change. Yeah. Beautiful. Lorna, you really want to say something else?
This is the last one, but that just makes me think of how, and this is confession, how uptight I get when I see stuff like we're seeing right now,
Mm-hmm.
and how so much of it seems like passion without structure, and how on earth do we help other people
Mm-hmm.
to have that, to at least be open to that kind of openness, right?
Yeah.
I love to learn a little something about that.
Yeah.
Because my idea, my instinct is to punch them in the nose. Which probably wouldn't help.
That's why we're here, to help you with those instincts.
That's how we have community. Don't do it.
Okay, I should wrap up. Just two things that I also had in mind that I wanted to say, and one is, and those of you who've been around a long time and know some of the early vineyard history, is just inviting the Spirit to come. How important it is to be intentional about saying, one of the lectionary readings upstairs is not trusting entirely in the flesh and in mortality. And it's this sense of recognizing our dependence, that we need a spiritual life to come in and flow through it, or it won't be enough. Right? If that isn't happening, it won't be enough what we're doing. So we need to keep inviting in whatever way makes the most sense to us, to invite the Spirit to fill what we're doing and bring it to life. And be intentional about that in all kind of ways. So in the early vineyard days, that was literally true. Just so often there would be the language in songs or in prayers to just come, Holy Spirit. And the other thing I think of, when I was thinking about our community, I was thinking of, like, when was a moment that we particularly saw the community full of the Spirit, and it was when we got together to help the refugees from Syria. And there's a sense of really opening the door for the Spirit when you actually start doing stuff, like when you do stuff as a team, and see that this is real, and there's something that is spiritually alive that flows through that. That's also important to remember. Okay, I want to close with a couple songs. I hope they resonate with some of the things that we've been talking about. I'll just introduce them really quickly. The first song, we'll just play them both right after each other. John, the first one, some of you may have heard before, and I thought of this one because one convocation with SSU that was full of the Spirit for me was when Joel Mason and Jeremy Barham played Cloud Cult's song called Energy in Us. And it's an interesting song because it's part of an album that tells almost like a science fiction story. You can hear some of the elements of that. Like imagine yourself being Captain Kirk on some starship. That's kind of the immediate context of the song. And yet the song is so effective at speaking to what it's speaking to. And so that I found an interesting recording of it that I wanted to share today. And then the last song is, I had to, when I thought of the Spirit, I had to include some Playing for Change, which is one of my favorite YouTube channels. And I've done this here once before, but it's Stevie Wonder's Higher Ground, done by the Playing for Change group, which draws together people and musicians from all over the world. So I hope you find some spiritual life in these.
A million years it's been since the search began. Still can't find it. Still can't find it. The fuel is nearly spent. Check the maps again. Can't let go of it. Can't let go of it. Now the crew is cold and drunk on chemicals. Can't believe in it. Can't believe in it. I heard the captain say took the written words of our philosophers and built a fire from it. Let's get those engines lit. We took the church's bell and built a mighty sail to carry forth this ship. But we're still losing it. And I heard the captain say, we're so close to it. It's really close to
let there still be energy in us. Amen. Go in peace.